Okay, the Cobra firearms. Let's see if I can get their whole logo in there. There we go. Cobra firearms, double barrel, 9mm derringer. Got this gun for Christmas. Finally, just got the work done to it that I wanted to do. And let me preface all this with stating that I researched this gun before I got it. I knew that quality wasn't that great. I knew there was probably going to be some problems that I was going to have to fix with the gun. That wasn't much of an issue. I didn't really care. I just wanted the derringer. I think it's cool. So, got it for Christmas anyway. And took it to the range. It got jammed up. Expended shells wouldn't come out of the gun. Long story longer. I had to bring the gun home with ammunition still in it. Not ammunition still in it, but spent ammunition. So anyway, got it home, got that out. Started taking the gun apart because I knew I was in for some more work. And I had seen that, some things had to be ground, some things had to be polished for sure. So I was ready to do all that. It wasn't a big deal. So anyway, took it apart. Right away noticed that the hammer was dimpled considerably, not just a little bit. So it had been dry fired numerous times, not sure how many, but there was definitely more than one slam against the safety pin. So that kind of threw a cog in the wheel. I didn't want to put it back together with that bad of a hammer in it. Plus I felt kind of gypped because now I had a damaged gun that I was putting back together. It didn't bother me to buy a gun that I was going to have to polish up and maybe rework a little bit to use, but it did bother me that I was buying a damaged gun. So made the phone call to the realtor, the retail place where I got it, not the realtor, the retail place where it was purchased, and they asked me to please go through Cobra first, and then we could go from there. So I did. I called Cobra, I emailed Cobra, I sent Cobra pictures. I was a pain in Cobra's ass for a couple of weeks. They responded to me finally via email, agreed with me that what I had stated as far as the hammer being dry fired looked like it was. The other grinding that I saw on the gun that I questioned them about, of course there was no response as to where that might have come from. Come to find out it comes from their factory because they sent me both parts out. I asked for the extractor and the hammer. And I asked for that simply so that I could put the gun back together right. The frame is gouged from where the hammer was dimpled. And I didn't really want to keep that. I would have rather had a whole new gun, but they obviously weren't going that route. But they did offer me the parts. So they sent me the parts. I put it back together. And as a shout out to the retail outlet, when I contacted them, their manager there was very, very amicable. And actually, when I told him the whole story about the purchase of the gun, he offered a $50 reduction in the price, which is more than generous. He didn't have to do that, and I appreciate it. That's for sure. By the way, it's Dunham's Sports in Warsaw, Indiana. And if you got to go deal with the guy that I originally dealt with there, you'll probably walk out like I did. But if you go, ask for the manager, and Derek, a really nice guy. But anyway, I put the gun back together and polished everything up today. And because I had put everything back together and went out and test fired it and still didn't like it. So I took it apart again today and polished everything. Now the trigger feels wonderful, I will say. I polished the inside of the frame where the gouge was. It took it out completely, so I was pretty happy about that. But when I put it all back together, I test fired it a few times without the handles on. And it was just sweet. It just released, the trigger released like you wouldn't believe. If you've fired one of these guns, you know the triggers are the main issue. Well, I'm going to tell you something that probably a lot of people haven't realized. I found it completely by mistake. Without the handles on, the thing was firing beautifully. And obviously I didn't dry fire it. I was catching the hammer. But actually the firing pins weren't even in. So it would have dimpled the hammer, but nothing else would have happened to the gun. But anyway, I put the handles back on. And that screw right there goes into a receiver. I'm saying receiver, where the frame is threaded for that screw and the screw on the other side. Goes into an opening. There's a cavity that the hammer goes into. So when I put the handles on, I had the hammer back all the way. Okay. Now, this gun's loaded right now. Obviously, when I had the hammer back and was messing around with it, there was no ammunition in it. But it's loaded now. I'm not going to take the 2 rounds out of it just to do a video. But the hammer was back all the way. And I put the handles on, and I couldn't fire the gun. And I thought, what the heck did I just do here? These screws go into a cavity, like I said, that this hammer goes into. So I took them apart, tried the hammer again, put it back together, but this time the hammer was forward, it was on half cock, and I put the handles on, and then I couldn't cock it. So I took it apart again, and I looked, and I was like, huh, I'm dumber than the guy that engineered this stupid thing. I didn't notice that that went into that same cavity where the hammer was, and that screw was actually holding the hammer from going back to full cock, or when I had it together the first time, it was holding it from releasing, which makes total sense once you see how it's put together. But it doesn't make any sense why it's designed that way, but it does make sense why it did it. So if you get problems with this, or if it's firing real rough, you might want to check that, because even if that screws against the hammer, it's not going to be releasing right. It's going to be real rough to release. And I'll tell you now, the way this thing is releasing right now, there's with no tension on it. Before I had, the hammer was dimpled and it was rubbing on the frame, okay? So that was friction that shouldn't be there. It was releasing like crap. With no friction on it, this thing releases like a dream. And I wonder how many of these screws right here are rubbing against that hammer. So if you've got one of these, take it apart and look at it. I'm going to try and get some washers that are the same size as the head, or at least the same size as this hole, that number 6 or 4, whatever it is, screw can go through, and build up at least 1 or 2 washers under there so that it possibly can't go up against the hammer. But crazy. Wouldn't have thought it would happen, but there it is. So there you go. There's my 2 cents.